There's clear evidence that Putin committed mass murder, just so as to establish himself as president. Though there are many people who may like to believe that Putin changed at some point from being a normal person to a genocidal maniac, it is simply untrue. Many experts say that Putin is a psychopath, and he has used murder for gain for the whole of the 25 years of his reign, even before he was anointed president. He was helped all along by his less well-known partner in crime, Nicolai Patrushev. Indeed, Vladimir Putin has not plotted and planned to expand the Russian Empire on his own. FSB Supremo Nicolai Patrushev has been with him all the way. Many people, even those in the highest positions in America and Europe, are still unaware of the motivations of these two villains. Some people, like Donald Trump for example, are taking a while to understand Putin's long-term plans. The plans he continues to have to retake the countries of the old Soviet Union, and by doing so to dominate the world, so as to be an equal foe to America. This may sound implausible and ridiculous, but the evidence is clear, and nothing but imprisonment or death can stop him. By the way, have you heard of Patrushev? It is likely you haven't. He's not so well known, yet he is instrumental in every evil plan that Russia inflicts on its enemies. He schemed together with Putin from the days when they were just low-grade crooks, working for the former KGB. Once they had a foothold in the Kremlin, they schemed to set out and kill innocent Russians, including children. Using their connections in the FSB, they organized and plotted to bomb apartment blocks. By carrying out these terrorist acts and blaming innocent Chechens, they had an excuse to attack Chechnya and looked like heroes to the Russian people. By fighting fake terrorism, they embedded themselves at the very top of Russian politics and made sure they remained there. Much has been written about Putin with the assumption that he's a brilliant strategist and mastermind, even though most Russians live in poverty despite its vast resources. Yet almost nothing is mentioned of Patrushev, the Machiavellian criminal genius behind Putin. Today, I will go over details of how he helped Putin come to power and make sure he was to become the most evil leader in the world since Hitler and Stalin. The information has been gleaned largely from the excellent book Blowing Up Russia by the Russian dissident and historian Yuri Felshtinsky. The very book is being held in a photo by Alexander Litvinenko, whose diary and testimony was used within. The details disclosed in the book are probably the reason for his assassination. Upon publication, the book was immediately banned in Russia. The evidence of large-scale murder ordered by Patrushev and Putin would incriminate them both in Russia or the International Criminal Court in The Hague. The book details this most fundamental episode in Putin's rise to power and how two psychopathic killers met and plotted murder, got away with it, and repeated the same over and over for 25 years. It explains how their crimes were uncovered by Alexander Litvinenko, then an FSB agent who escaped Russia and was subsequently murdered in London. In 2000, Litvinenko had already been imprisoned 2 times, and charges were pending to imprison him a 3rd time. Litvinenko had also had his passport confiscated. He took the chance to escape via a steamboat crossing from Sochi to Georgia, where by good fortune his papers were not checked, then made it to the UK. He was to be tracked down by Putin's henchmen in London. There he was poisoned with tea laced with polonium and died soon afterwards. The story is well known. Litvinenko was the greatest danger to the rising power of Putin and Patrushev, and they made sure he was eliminated. The news stories focused mainly on his mysterious death and how it occurred in central London and who the Russian perpetrators were. The crime relating to the investigation by the Metropolitan Police was huge news, shown on BBC every night. But how the murder of Litvinenko was linked to the crimes committed in Russia, namely the blowing up of apartment blocks, was brushed aside. How the crimes were directly linked to Putin seemed to be of less interest to the public. Even though the crimes were dealt with in the subsequent inquiry, the seriousness was ignored. The complexity of the links to Putin meant the crimes involved were not properly addressed by heads of nations for years. Eventually, the story dropped out of interest. If the US and Europe had truly understood the importance of the horrific atrocities that inflicted death on innocent Russians and Chechens, Would Obama and Clinton have pressed the reset button, exonerating Putin? Or did they know and believe that a leader deliberately killing people could be justified? To return to Nicolai Patrushev, he's a bully, intimidating even his closest associates. He enjoys foul-mouthed banter at meetings, frightening his colleagues. Footage of meetings in the Kremlin show how those attending avert their eyes, not drawing attention to themselves. Of course, they fear for their lives. They know Putin and Patrushev will kill anyone who disagrees with them. They've done this many times, framing the victims who are poisoned or fall from windows as unfortunate suicide cases. And Patrushev has no qualms at all about organizing the assassinations. Famously, he is considered to have arranged the death of Wagner chief Yevgeny Prigozhin, who attempted an almost successful coup. After Prigozhin was banished to Belarus, he was as passenger in a plane that crashed, killing all inside. The job was successfully carried out, preventing him from being a danger to Putin. Patrushev is also a master at making corrupt deals, including importing vast quantities of drugs. This is just a fun sideline for him. His current gift is in fomenting outrageous conspiracy theories about Ukraine and the United States. The conspiracy theories are hard to disprove and successfully spread worldwide. In Latin America and India, where RT is considered a normal news channel, the stories are presented as mainstream. The Indian, African and South American viewers even believe Putin is fighting for their cause. For the oppressed global South, they think he cares about them, but he doesn't. Black people and brown people disgust him, hence why he surrounds himself with blue-eyed Slavs. Though he doesn't appear to mind dark-skinned folk from Africa, North Korea and India who will take a bullet for him on the front in Ukraine. That's something he will agree to. Putin sees war as an amusing game and declared in his 2024 Question Time that life would be boring without wars. Yes, Putin didn't start a war because of NATO, Nazis or the preserving Russian language. He started a war to stop feeling bored. Only a psychopath could possibly think that causing deaths, destruction, economic collapse and disabilities to hundreds of thousands is a valid reason to prevent boredom. RT, formerly Russian television, helps form anti-Western opinions in poor countries and among the weak-minded. We've all heard the outrageous lies about Ukraine being a Nazi country and the US having 200 biolabs worldwide where experiments on humans are carried out. These were all Patrushev's ideas. The lies are enthusiastically repeated by useful idiots as justification for the outrageous invasion of Ukraine and why Ukraine should capitulate, thereby giving Russia a new border with Europe to continue further invasions. In the US, Marjorie Taylor Greene has fully taken the conspiracies on board and is so taken in that the Republican senator is best known as Moscow Marge, though it's doubtful she knows anything about Russia. Putin and Patrushev made billions for themselves through criminal activities spanning the world from Afghanistan to Colombia, even before being in the top leadership. It may be no coincidence that a new alliance between Russia and the Taliban has just been agreed. The duo have used the elite in Russian society for their own purposes and designed an unbreakable power vertical. They ensured above all that their adored secret police service, the FSB, remains 100% in control of the Kremlin, keeping at bay opposition clans and the military who are best placed to stage a coup. The feared and hated KGB was repackaged under a different name, even has its own public day in December. It is called Security Service Workers' Day, formerly Checker Day. It was reinstated to honor the formation of the feared organization who sent Russians to gulags. Nice of them. To explain Putin's rise to power, we must go back to the 90s, to the breakup of the USSR, when freeing up the economy was the order of the day. Perestroika was the blueprint to democratize Russia. It took off badly due to gross mismanagement and greed, and inflation reached a staggering 2,318%. Impoverished Russians took to the streets to protest. This led to a two-day civil war and reached a stage where even the Moscow White House was bombed. Russia had descended into chaos. In 1994, Yeltsin was in trouble and decided to wage a pointless war against Chechnya, an independent nation of proud people who had fought hard for autonomy. By doing so, Yeltsin had diverted attention away from his appalling rule that had caused terrible shortages and poverty. Russia lost this war, made a settlement, but continued terrorizing the country and murdering all their elected presidents one by one using car bombs and missile attacks both within and outside Chechnya. No one, including the US, seemed that concerned about Russian terrorism against an autonomous region. The US under Clinton and Bush continued having friendly talks and sympathizing with each other about terrorism. The Yeltsin years were ones in which criminality and corruption in the government grew exponentially. A few people became immensely rich. All of the vast country's assets, oil, nickel, gold mines, were sold off at a fraction of their value to a handful of people in the know. The West kept its distance, believing that the former USSR was in good hands, that it would all work itself out as long as the free market was implemented. They hadn't understood that corruption had been embedded for the whole of Russia's existence. People like George Bush and Barack Obama were taken for fools. Russia hoodwinked them and got away with it. The plan to privatize the nation's wealth started out in good faith. Russia produced vouchers for every Russian national to purchase and invest in a company of their choice. But most people had no understanding of how the vouchers worked and sold them on the street for a few rubles or a bottle of vodka. The opportunists bought them up, often dressing like tramps and holding cardboard signs, so as to make the vouchers appear worthless. The ultimate winners were a handful of men who acquired the vouchers and the vast Russian assets almost for free. In this way, Russia had its wealth stolen and was gravely impoverished by their loss for decades to come. Instead of building a strong free market system, Russia became a criminal state with a few oligarchs in charge of the wealth. A country where a teacher is still only earning $300 a month. The collapsing economy led to the attempted impeachment of Yeltsin in 1998 on 5 charges, but none were for the mishandling of the privatization sales. The impeachment charges were for illegally breaking up the Soviet Union, for replacing the government with a smaller Duma in which Yeltsin wielded greater power, for starting the war in Chechnya, which is interesting, proving that some Russians clearly thought it was wrong, for genocide of the Russian people by way of reform, and for weakening the armed forces. The impeachment failed, but so did Yeltsin's health, and he needed to step down, but had to ensure he escaped criminal convictions. Due to the depth of corruption that Yeltsin, his family and his cronies were mired in, it was essential to have a successor that was criminally minded to avoid Yeltsin being charged and imprisoned. The tumultuous days of 1998 led to Operation Successor, when Yeltsin would seek someone to be foisted on the Russian people by means of a coronation and phony election to save his skin. Putin popped up as an unlikely choice after several other candidates failed to be evil and corrupt enough. Putin turned out to be ideal, an FSB official who had managed his office efficiently while at the same time running a mafia-style enterprise from St. Petersburg. He ticked all boxes. He also seemed to have the ability to be molded and was made Prime Minister on August 9, 1999. Then, through the most incredible plan cooked up by Putin and his sidekick Patrushev, he became president almost overnight. Putin and Patrushev both pined for the old Soviet days when Russia wielded more power internationally than it does now, and this has been their obsession ever since. The idea Stalin had for expanding the Russian Empire is still embedded in their minds and will be until their death. The pair have always wanted to recreate the much-hated empire and hankered for the miserable and grey Cold War days of Andropov and Brezhnev. With no imagination or any particular ideology of their own, such as communism, they can only copy old defunct ideas. They don't seem aware that there is zero desire from any nation who had suffered under Stalin to become part of their hideous empire again. So let's roll back a few years to June 1951, when Patrushev was born, just a few months before Putin. His parents had lived through the wartime blockade of Leningrad and had tried to build a new life in St. Petersburg. The family lived in one of those grim communal apartments, just as Putin did, sharing a toilet and cooking facilities with numerous other families. The home was incidentally just a few blocks away from the Yusupov Palace where Rasputin was shot. Patrushev attended Leningrad High School number 211 and later graduated from the Leningrad Shipbuilding Institute with a diploma in engineering, but hankered after a more privileged and exciting life, one that could be offered by the KGB. Unlike Putin, Patrushev did not make it to the higher school of the KGB in Moscow. Instead, after being recruited by the KGB in Leningrad, he was sent to the KGB school in Minsk, now in Belarus, where he graduated in a year with a focus on law. Although not a classmate of Putin, he later met him in the Big House, the KGB's Leningrad headquarters, which was within walking distance of his childhood apartment. Patrushev was not a dogmatic communist due to the strong religious beliefs he purported to follow. But like Putin, he has never upheld Christian values at all and sees theft and murder, even genocide, as just fine. Shortly after the demise of the Soviet Union, in 1992, Patrushev was transferred from St. Petersburg to the regional branch of state security in the neighboring region of Karelia, bordering Finland. Patrushev became Karelia's Minister of State Security, tasked with restraining any independence-oriented tendencies. Karelia was the region where Yuri Andropov began his KGB career in the 1930s. Andropov was later the all-powerful chair of the KGB, and then successor to Leonid Brezhnev as the Soviet leader. The Karelian KGB therefore had a cultish allegiance to Andropov. He was their hero, and Patrushev absorbed many elements of the Andropov myth. He may even have had a conversion moment and began seeing himself as another Andropov. He dreamed of bringing state security personnel into the Kremlin. Patrushev wrote of the profound influence Andropov had on his view of the political system in a biography of Andropov, published in 2006 by Roy Medvedev. The book was awarded first prize in the FSB annual literary competition and became a bestseller in Russian state security circles. The adoration of Andropov by both Putin and Patrushev was certainly misguided, since he was only General Secretary for 1 year and for 9 months of that terminally ill with kidney failure, being almost permanently on kidney dialysis. Some thought he may have been poisoned. His illness and absence were not mentioned by Russian authorities until after his death, which is probably why most of us know little of Andropov. Yet to both Putin and Patrushev, the era of Andropov epitomized everything they loved about the old Soviet Union: the exciting Cold War, the power over other countries, the autocratic rule. The two Soviet zealots considered his time to be a golden age they wished Russia to return to. The golden age ended with Gorbachev, Glasnost, and Perestroika. The loss of empire, which Putin still recalls with tears in his eyes, followed. All that Putin and Patrushev thought was bad about Russia happened after Andropov. Indeed, Putin has said many times that the loss of the USSR is the greatest disaster in history. Nevertheless, the lifestyle of Andropov was in sharp contrast to the current billionaire rulers. His home was monastically plain and simple, while Putin and his cronies had huge mansions and billions in Swiss banks. Putin and Patrushev have never been strong on self-awareness. Patrushev was moved on from Karelia just 2 years later, in 1994. He had a close shave due to being implicated in a huge illegal deal to sell stolen Karelian birch. The public prosecutor had initiated criminal proceedings against him, and lucky for him, he was transferred and offered a position in Moscow as head of the Internal Security Directorate at the Lubyanka headquarters just in time, escaping the jurisdiction of Karelia. Patrushev was one of a dozen high-level state security officers who began the task of working on strengthening FSB influence in Russian politics at the federal level. Patrushev's position allowed him to survey the human resource potential in the FSB ranks. One of these colleagues was none other than Putin. It could very well be that it was Patrushev who discovered Putin. And he has always acknowledged Patrushev's high status in the Kremlin hierarchy of power, appointing him to second-in-command roles. When President Boris Yeltsin appointed Putin as Prime Minister in 1999, Putin recommended Patrushev to succeed him as FSB director. Announcing Patrushev's appointment in 1999, Putin joked, "Colonel Putin gives up the post," to which Patrushev somewhat uncomfortably replied, "Colonel General Patrushev receives the post." Putin ominously remarked, "He will make the state security service even more powerful." Soon after Putin's appointment, there followed the series of horrific explosions discussed earlier. They were in Moscow and two provincial cities and left more than 300 dead and 1,000 wounded. Putin and Patrushev quickly blamed Chechen separatist leaders, though all indications were that the FSB had organized them as a false flag. One of the apartment block's terrorism plots failed, leading to numerous questions, especially as FSB agents were seen going in to plant the explosives. Alexander Litvinenko, an FSB agent at the time, later stated that a Colonel Galkin knew who were responsible for the bombings and the FSB were in cooperation with the GRU. We know what happened next. David Satter, expert on Russia, says, "The evidence is overwhelming that the apartment house bombings in 1999 in Moscow, Buynaksk and Volgodonsk, which provided a pretext for the Second Chechen War and catapulted Putin into the presidency, were carried out by the FSB. Yet, to this day, an indifferent world has made little attempt to grasp the significance of what was the greatest political provocation since the burning of the Reichstag. Further to the bombings all over Moscow and Dagestan, so soon after Putin's appointment, Chechnya was attacked mercilessly by Russia. Putin's popularity soared, and within months, he was made president. Putin's government had used the apartment bombings as a pretext to reopen the conflict in Chechnya, leading to the radical escalation of violence in the breakaway republic and the neighboring regions. This was a highly criminal act of murder, but as far as America and the West were concerned, they either ignored the facts or didn't exactly know. The war helped restore the reputational prestige of the FSB, and Patrushev was hailed by Russian state media as the resolute administrator whose decisions and policies made Russia safer. Patrushev took advantage of the media spotlight, placing FSB officers on a pedestal as the new nobility tasked with governing Russia in the spirit of self-sacrifice and for the sake of the country's greater glory. In an interview with the daily newspaper, Komsomolskaya Pravda, timed to coincide with the Day of the Chekists, Patrushev waxed lyrical about the FSB officers nominated to receive the highest state awards. Highbrow intellectual analysts, broad-shouldered, seasoned Special Forces soldiers, silent bomb technicians, disciplined investigators, calm counterintelligence officers. Outwardly, they are different, but there is one important trait that unites them all. They are the people who want to serve their homeland, if you will. They are modern new nobility. This description contrasts with the hapless pair who went to Salisbury to carry out an assassination on Sergei Skripal. Time is limited for Putin and Patrushev as their dreams of empire crash away. Syria lost, Moldova lost, Georgia losing, and their friends in Chechnya, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Armenia and Belarus tire of their killing games or are about to be overthrown. Too bad they didn't see that from the start. Thank you for watching to the end. I intend to do a second part to the video soon, so please subscribe if you're interested.